This is your 28storms.com and Hurricane Tracker app tropical weather update for Monday, October 17th. Much of the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea are now quiet since the area of low pressure over the northwest Caribbean has pushed on into the southern Gulf of Mexico, and that is the focus of today's video. This area of low pressure was organizing fairly well during the overnight hours. In fact, it looked as though there was a reasonable chance of this becoming a tropical depression or tropical storm this afternoon. However, within the last 6 to 12 hours, the system has once again become more disorganized. There may be an increase in southwest wind shear already underway. We can see that the area of low pressure is still primarily centered over the Yucatan Peninsula in areas just to the north, while much of the strongest convection is now well to the northeast of the center, and this is just an indication that the upper level environment is becoming less favorable with time. The latest water vapor imagery of the United States shows that we already have a lot of dry air and wind shear in place across much of the central and northern Gulf of Mexico, and we have a couple reinforcing shots of troughiness beginning to make its way across the central part of the country. You can see it's making its way across the central plains at the moment, and we have more northwest flow stemming from the Pacific Northwest, and all of this is going to equate to a very deep and amplified long wave trough over much of the eastern United States. In fact, some areas of the central Gulf Coast will be experiencing highs in the upper 60s or low 70s during the middle and latter half of this upcoming week, and that is the first time we are experiencing temperatures anywhere close to that during this fall season. All of this is going to amount to a very rainy period across much of central and southern Florida, and eventually this low pressure area will merge with that non-tropical trough, and it's going to continue bringing some enhanced precip all the way into the mid-Atlantic and northeast. The latest 5-day precipitation forecast from the HPC is calling for an excess of 4 to 5 inches across southwest Florida, and you can almost make out the overall track of the low pressure center as it continues to move more toward the north, enhancing the rainfall. The following is the latest wind shear tendency chart from the SIMS website. As you can see, and as mentioned before, we have a lot of wind shear in excess of about 40 to 50 knots over the northeast Gulf of Mexico. We still have a very small pocket of favorable upper level ridging just to the northeast of Cancun, Mexico. However, this area is expected to narrow even more with time as the troughiness over the central United States begins to deepen and dive down even more. In addition, much of the eastern Pacific is quiet with no organized tropical disturbances, so overall the tropics are fairly calm this afternoon. Looking ahead over the next 6 to 7 days, starting off with the latest forecast from the CMC model, we see the broad area of low pressure initially over the southern Gulf of Mexico, but that quickly gets shunted off toward the northeast in advance of that cold front beginning to push its way more toward the southeast. And as we go into day 6, the CMC is developing another area of low pressure over the southwest Caribbean, and that is something that we will have to monitor because the lower part of the cold front will stall over the northwest Caribbean, so the surface pressures may remain fairly low in that area, and much of the remainder of the Gulf, Caribbean, and tropical Atlantic are quiet. And over into the eastern Pacific, the model is also developing another low, but this is well to the south of the Mexican coast. The latest forecast from the GFS model is also showing our Gulf low being absorbed by that much larger non-tropical system, and as we go into the next 6 to 7 days, it's keeping much of the tropical Atlantic fairly quiet. It's also not developing any low pressure system over the western Caribbean, so that is probably a more reasonable scenario compared to what we just saw with the CMC model, although there is some agreement with a low pressure system forming to the south of Mexico within 5 to 7 days. The good news is that it's rather far out, and the models are still keeping it to the south of the Mexican coast at this time. And finally, this is the latest forecast from the ECMWF model. As we go into Tuesday morning, notice that the area of low pressure is still located over the southeast Gulf of Mexico, but we also have this trough beginning to deeply amplify over much of the lower Mississippi Valley. We also have a surface low forming along the cold front over northern Mississippi and portions of the Ozarks. As we go into Wednesday morning, the trough is now fully amplified into the southeast United States, and our low pressure system that was once over the southeast Gulf is beginning to merge with the non-tropical system over much of the east coast, providing much in the way of rainfall, but it's not going to last for an extended period of time. As we can see as we go into Thursday, we already have the system being fully absorbed by an upper level low, and it may actually occlude. And then as we go into Friday, it looks like it opens up again and continues to advance off toward the northeast into the Canadian Maritimes, while much of the remainder of the deep tropical Atlantic is forecast to be quiet throughout the next 7 days. So the main threat over the next 72 hours appears to be the threat of some heavy rainfall across central and southern Florida, with the possibility of some pretty good wind gusts, but nothing really tropical in nature, and certainly nothing overly significant. And in the meantime, the rest of the tropics are fairly clear. So we're looking at good out there at this moment, but please stay tuned to 28storms.com throughout the remainder of hurricane season.